tonight, drug drivers. Just how many are on our roads?
Do you think we know the true extent of it? I mean, how much is out there?
No, not so.
We travel across Europe to see the methods others use to catch them.
It could be anybody, so it depends on the stuff they take. It's really from the 16-year-old moped driver up to the 65-year-old doctor or grandfather, so it's really surprising that it's all through the society.
Good evening and welcome to the Tonight programme. Driving while under the influence of illegal drugs is a menace that destroys lives, and yet it is a problem that successive governments have failed to control. Tonight, Martin Geiser investigates whether recent changes in the law will see more offenders brought to justice.
Every day, up and down the country, somebody is likely to lose their life on the road. It's huge, you know, both drug and drink driving.
It's been described as an epidemic, but it goes unnoticed by most of us.
I never see someone taking drugs and think, are they driving?
Some European countries catch tens of thousands of drug drivers every year. British figures are nothing like that, yet statistics suggest the problem here is just as acute.
70% of people you know will take drugs and drive a car.
Without question, yeah.
It transcends class and social status.
The pop singer was jailed last month after admitting driving while unfit through drugs. He'd been found slumped at the wheel of his car.
There's no doubt that real progress has been made in the war against drink driving over the past 30 years or so. But throughout that time, the problem of drug driving has passed largely under the radar. This evening, I'll be asking why and whether a new front can be opened in the battle to make our road network a safer place.
Rachel Ward was a bright, popular young woman with her whole life ahead of her.
And when can we come and see Manchester?
She had a right bubbly personality, always full of life, happy. Our house was always full of, you know, if it wasn't them, it was other young people, and of course that's all gone now.
It was a routine journey almost 4 years ago. Rachel was driving to her boyfriend's house. She was Janice's only child and her cousin's best friend.
There was a knock on the door, 2 policemen. And whenever I saw them, I knew it was Rachel. And I kept saying that to them, please no Rachel.
Rachel's car was hit head-on by a car driving on the wrong side of the road. She didn't have a chance.
We were met with a horrific scene, and the easiest way to describe that was it was as a bomb had gone off. The driver who crashed head-on into Rachel was the one that was under the influence of drugs. There's no doubt that will have impacted upon his driving ability and the recklessness of the way he was performing manoeuvres on our roads.
In the weeks after the tragedy, Rachel's mother Janice discovered that the driver, Brian Redfern, had been driving high on the drug speed.
Suppose we got angry because it was needless. It was their fault that she lost her life. And that's really hard to live with.
British police don't have to test for drugs after a collision, but they can arrest someone if they suspect they're under the influence. Redfern had his blood taken at hospital.
Well, he was hurt himself in the accident and taken to hospital, so it might never have come out that he had been on drugs.
Redfern was sentenced to 7 years, just half the maximum for causing death by dangerous driving.
That was reckless. He was driving down a backcountry road, chasing another man, but only because he'd overtaken him. He's a 27-year-old man. You think he would know better by now. It's just horrible thinking what she must have seen that night. Just, you don't even... I mean, I've never driven that road and I never will.
The government estimate that around 200 deaths and 500 serious injuries are caused every year by people taking drugs and driving. But in truth, that's guesswork. Many experts believe the reality is much, much worse. Rachel Ward's death, for example, wasn't included in the Scottish drug driving figures in 2010. Dr. Rob Tunbridge was head of research into drink and drug driving at the Department for Transport throughout the 90s.
The big problem is that we don't have accurate figures on drug driving. The only figures that are really available are from coroner's data where somebody may have died and then a blood sample's taken and the drugs are detected that way. But we don't have roadside screening, so we're unable to tell the level of drug driving in the general driving population.
There's a huge amount of anecdotal feedback that it's an issue, and innumerable surveys where young people have freely admitted, without ever trying to hide the fact, that they take drugs and drive.
Chief Constable Suzette Davenport is in charge of police efforts to crack down on drug drivers in England and Wales.
We don't know the extent of drug driving. We are much clearer in terms of alcohol and drink driving, but we don't know the extent in relation to drug driving.
You're a Chief Constable and you've got national responsibility for policing this, and you say you've got no idea how many people are taking drugs and driving.
No.
How worried are you about that?
I am worried, and I've been pressing for, all the time that I've been the national lead for roads policing, that we are more effective in both understanding but also for the legislation which will enable us to deal with drug drivers.
So the police need more powers and the right kit if they're to tackle this problem effectively. When it comes to stopping suspected drink drivers, they're well practiced and well equipped.
Just take a deep breath, mate, and blow. Go on. Right, you've blown 69, mate. All right, so you are over the legal limit. You have failed.
Tonight, I'm out with a Greater Manchester Police Traffic Unit. It's a busy patrol as ever.
We can stop anything on a road that we want to for a routine check.
Breathalyzers have been around for 40 years. They've been an important tool in keeping our roads safe. The police in Manchester arrest over 2,000 people each year for drink driving. Detecting alcohol is fairly easy. Traffic officers can usually smell it.
You failed the roadside breath test, OK? Right. You are under arrest on suspicion of drink driving. You don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence.
Drug driving is completely different.
We don't get as many drug drivers as we probably like.
In the absence of a roadside testing kit, officers have to use their intuition and guesswork.
It's a lot harder to detect drugs because there are so many, and each one has its own characteristic and how people react. It's experience of how people drive and how the demeanour is and how they speak to you and how they're looking at you.
Do you think we know the true extent of it? I mean, how much is out there?
No, not at all.
38 mile road.
Many other countries do use roadside testing kits, a drug version of the breathalyzer, if you like. Here in the UK, the authorities have been talking about bringing them in for more than 10 years.
Despite the fact we've had a law allowing roadside drug screening since 2003, there's been an attitude at the Home Office that the devices that very many other countries are using are not up to British standards. They want a device which is almost up to the standard, what we call evidential standards, the standards that are required to prosecute people with a drug sample.
Bernd Heller is one of Germany's most senior traffic policemen. 10 years of experience have taught him that the problem of drug driving transcends any stereotype.
It could be anybody, so it depends on the stuff they take. So let's say some ecstasy or some marijuana or cocaine. It's really from the 16-year-old moped driver up to the 65 or 70-year-old doctor or grandfather or whatever. So it's really surprising that it's all through the society.
At the moment, we're not testing people on the roadside. How exposed are we?
You really are not testing people, okay? So then you have to go a long way to introduce testing devices. You have to educate your officers, equip your officers.
So we went to Hamburg in Germany to see how it can be done.
We're for sure going to show you the urine test and the mouth swab test.
Okay,
so.
great. And what would cause you to pull somebody over?
Sometimes if we can get a look in their eyes, like see if the eyes are red.
Unlike the UK, these officers are stopping drug driving suspects all the time.
There is a little thing in there that turns blue.
Most of the people we saw being stopped were happy to comply with the testing process. So he's asked him to close his eyes and count to 30. Those are both the kind of tests that British police officers can and do carry out on the roadside at the moment. But he hasn't come through that looking too good, so what Bernd can now do is ask him to take a urine test or a saliva test, and that'll give a really true indication as to whether or not this man has been taking cannabis or any other kind of drug. Here, all the tested negative for drugs. For some, the relief was clear.
Danke. Yes, you're... What can I say?
Do you think it's a good thing that they pull people over and test them?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because when you got something in your brain, I think you better let the car at your home and drive by bus or whatever.
You're happy to cooperate?
Yeah, why not?
German police don't compromise when it comes to drug driving. They make more than 30,000 arrests each year. In Britain, just a fraction of that number are pulled in, despite the fact that more people here take illegal drugs. Other countries manage it, though. In Germany, they take 30,000 licences a year off drivers for being under the influence of drugs. In Britain, we take, what, 2?
Not a lot.
Why is that?
Not a lot. I can't speak for what they do abroad. I can only talk about what it is that we do here. My desire, commitment, together with people from the Department of Transport and Home Office, to improve the position that we've got now to make us more effective.
But we've been hearing that for 10 years. There have been conversations, chins have been stroked, and all that time, people have been dying as a result of this.
It's much longer than I would want to be.
The Chief Constable went on to tell me that we wouldn't see the introduction of roadside testing until 2015 at the earliest. But the Home Office deny that, insisting roadside testing will be introduced next year. They say, we've already approved new drug testing equipment which is available for use at police stations, and we aim to approve roadside drug testing devices as soon as possible. Holland is a country famous for its permissive attitude to cannabis. It's the most popular controlled drug in the world, but it can seriously impair your ability to drive. I've come here to see just what happens when people smoke weed and get behind the wheel.
So studies suggest if you've got evidence of any cannabis in your system, or what's known as THC, which is the active ingredient in cannabis that makes users stoned, this doubles your risk of having serious injury or fatality from driving. If you've got any alcohol, I think your risk is multiplied by 8 times, but if you've got the mixture of the two, the risk is multiplied 16 times.
It is illegal to take drugs and drive in Holland. We asked 2 very sober Dutch drivers to smoke the drug, then test their driving under controlled conditions at a track.
Hello, I'm Remco. I'm 40 years old and I never smoked cannabis.
Hi, I'm Nikki. I'm 23 and I smoke weed 2 times a month.
You think there's going to be a big difference in your driving?
I think I can drive all right.
Even when you've had a smoke?
Yeah, I think so, but I'm not sure.
Both drivers have already successfully completed the course before smoking any cannabis. But now, before they're even moving, they're struggling to follow the simplest instructions.
Then you park. Sorry, one more time again.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're entering with 80 kilometers an hour. You brake.
Whenever I want, and then you tell me to go to the left or the right.
Yes. How do you feel?
A bit dizzy, but it's still okay.
Yeah, you went totally to the right. Yeah?
Yeah.
And you hit, I think, 4 or 5 goals.
I think maybe even more.
Maybe more, okay.
It is a straightforward course, nothing too testing, but the track doesn't seem so easy anymore.
Put them in reverse, no, clutching.
Even at low speeds, they're struggling with spatial awareness, but they're persevering.
This was hard.
Difficult?
Yes. Never again.
Never again.
Oh my God.
So, what did the expert think?
The steering was not more controlled anymore. It was very aggressive what they did. They didn't understand what I was telling them.
When you were being given instructions, how did you cope with that? How did you process it?
Different. I had to ask it like 4 times before to memorize it.
This is a very controlled environment. How do you think you would have done if that was on the road for real?
Like the reaction, the time it takes way longer than before. If something would happen, like someone would stop immediately, I would hit the brakes and maybe not in time.
Under British law at the moment, you can only really be prosecuted if the police spot something they think will help them prove that the drugs in your system were affecting the way you drive. So both of our drivers probably wouldn't have been stopped on British roads, despite the fact that they both accept they weren't in control of the car, and our expert instructor insists they'd have been a positive danger to anyone else on the road.
Gwyn Lewis has earned himself a reputation for successfully defending motorists who end up in court. He's handled more than 3,000 drink-drive cases, but doesn't come across drugs charges very often.
I mean, the reality is that I've been doing this for pushing 30 years, and in all that time I've done maybe a handful of cases, so it's pretty rare.
But it's easy, comparatively speaking, for you as a defence lawyer to get somebody off a drug driving charge.
Easier than it is for drink, that's for sure. I have to stress it's this two-stage process which is causing the prosecution's problems at the moment.
Police don't just have to establish that a driver has drugs in their bloodstream. If they want to prosecute, they need to prove that those drugs were affecting that person's driving.
The prosecution may not be able to establish the two elements, that is the unfit driving together with the drugs being in the system.
But next year things will change, largely thanks to pressure from families left bereaved by drug drivers.
The government at the moment are considering how the law is going to work. They have suggested a range of 8 illicit drugs that will be subject to the law, and if you're found to be above a certain concentration with those drugs, you would be guilty of an offence.
Gwyn Lewis believes that when the new law is finally implemented, it will give the police the powers they need. The courts and his casebook will be busy.
What difference is the new law going to make?
Well, fundamentally, as I understand it, it's going to be a complete game changer, because merely having a quantity of drugs in your system will be sufficient for a prosecution to be brought. It won't need impaired driving. In the same way as for drink driving at the moment, you may be driving perfectly well, may not have caused an accident, may not have had any involvement with anybody, but simply be stopped and found to be over the prescribed limit, and that's an offence in and of itself.
But he has a stark warning. For years he's fought the law on drink driving, and he thinks the new drug drive legislation will face a variety of challenges.
Classic examples, passive smoking. What are you going to do with passive smoking? If somebody else was smoking and you just happened to be there and you actually ingested the drug in that way?
Back on the streets of Hamburg, our patrol are still hard at work.
We offered him the urine test. The guy resisted this. He said, well, I don't have time for this, and we're going to take him to the station and take his blood if he wants to or not.
It's a time-consuming and expensive process, all this.
There's a lot of paperwork to be filled out. Here is the first of it. It's a series of costs. Blutprobenennahme, that's taking the blood. There's the call-out fee for the doctor. There's the consultation fee for the doctor. It all adds up to €109.72. And if this man tests positive, this is going to be his bill.
In fact, the results of his blood tests came back this week, They were negative. He was released without charge. Here in the UK, offenders will face a fine, a driving ban, and sometimes even prison. The police will have to pick up the tab for the rest of the process, and budgets are very tight already. Forces won't have to use the new kits, so will they? When you go to other chief constables and say, you've got to use these kits, I want you to make it work financially, do you think you're going to find resistance?
Well, what I will do is I will say, this is a piece of equipment, this is a piece of legislation, I need, the public want and need you to protect them from harm. I would encourage you to do that.
We've succeeded in making drink driving a taboo, but there's still a massive amount of work to be done to get drug drivers off the road. I went to seek some opinions among young people in Manchester.
Would you think it's as serious if you saw somebody taking a line of cocaine and then driving?
I value it as being just as serious, but the problem is I don't make that connection, so unless I was to see them do a line of cocaine and then go and get in their car, you would probably ask them if they were drinking, like, oh, are you driving tonight? So you make sure they're not going to be over the limit or anything like that. But if they're doing something like coke, then you just don't.
I think this is one of the problems the government's having, that it just associates all drugs as being very similar. And I'm not sure how the tests that they're going to be bringing in are going to work, but you know, comparing cannabis to cocaine, they're going to have very different effects when someone's driving.
So 70% of people you know will take drugs and drive a car?
Without question, yeah.
The hope is that this new law will be a deterrent. However, for all the roadside testing in Germany, it doesn't seem to put people off. They're still catching the same number of drug drivers year after year.
So roadside testing's not a huge deterrent?
No.
But our senior German traffic officer says it is working because drug-related injuries and fatalities are coming down.
At the same time, we are increasing our enforcement. At the same time, injuries and fatalities because of drugs are going down. And that's a pretty good message to go to the public to say it is for your safety and security.
Finally, critics say that after decades of inaction, things are slowly starting to change. But it is all tragically too late for some.
She might have got married and we're never going to have grandchildren. It's all these things that we've been deprived of. But she's the one that has been deprived the most because she lost her life. And Rachel loved life.
If we don't see thousands of drug drivers being caught and prosecuted, then we're not doing our job properly. We're not taking it seriously, and all the campaigning by the families of victims will have been in vain. We owe it to them to make sure that it's implemented and as quickly as possible.
The government's expected to announce final plans for the new drug driving law next year. Now, if you'd like more information on tonight's programme, please visit our website at itv.com/tonight. Until next week, though, good evening and thanks for watching.
I think the way people drink the sort of habitual nightly bottle of wine, it becomes so habitual that you don't notice the impact it's having on you.